What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to the channel.
Yo.
So Charles Oliveira had his night last night. Michael Chandler had one of the best knockouts of all time, but let's also not overlook and not give the proper respect to Mr. Dimitry Bivol, the underdog, 5-1 underdog, coming in and beating the crap out of Canelo Alvarez.
Yeah, that was insane. And on Cinco de Mayo weekend, you got to expect Canelo to do big business. And he's always, daring to be great and trying to move forward and move up in weight classes. Do a lot of things that most boxers never even consider doing. And the promoters wouldn't even allow most of the time. Yeah. Canelo's in that position where he was right there as pound for pound the best boxer on the planet. And he took on a big challenger, somebody who came ready to seize their moment and become a superstar. And while the UFC did have an amazing fight card, absolutely amazing, a lot of the people that were on it were already stars in our minds. Well, a star was born last night over there in Las Vegas on Cinco de Mayo weekend, and it was against the Mexican boxer Canelo. It wasn't his night. Bivol, I hardly knew who the guy was going into that fight. I knew he was good. I knew he was strong, a power puncher, and undefeated. But my God, I didn't realize he was going to beat the pound-for-pound #1 boxer in the world. And while he was a lot bigger, it really wasn't as big of a difference as I was expecting to see when I did see them both in the ring.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the credit to Canelo for going up in weight, because a lot of people today, and I've been reading the articles and social media posts, are ragging on him, saying that he didn't show up and, he bit off more than he could chew. Canelo's head is blah, blah. You know how it gets with boxing talking points sometimes. But the reality of the matter is Canelo's a guy that started his career at 140 pounds, and he competed last night at 175 pounds. That's pretty much unheard of, especially against an undefeated power puncher from Russia. The fact that he's stepping up and taking these challenges, he deserves a lot of credit. And Canelo loses no respect in my book. He's still one of the best boxers on the planet. And if he just stayed between that 140, 147, 154, maybe 160 range, there's nobody that can beat him. I don't think the Charlos can beat him. I don't think Benavidez, all these other names that they're throwing out there. I truly don't believe that any of those people have a chance at beating Canelo. It takes some serious size advantage and a comparable skill set to beat him. Unfortunately for Mr. Alvarez, he ran into exactly that last night in Dimitry Bivol. The combinations that Bivol were throwing was just nothing short of masterful. He was backing Canelo up against the rope. It wasn't just that he was winning rounds and it was a close fight outpointing Canelo. He had Canelo, a guy who's not looked at all wavered since he fought Triple G in that first fight. He had Canelo literally looking confused in between rounds, looking to his coach, Eddie Reynoso, for some advice and some guidance, like, hey, this guy is teeing off on me, and I'm just sort of loading up big power shots that he's blocking and seeing coming from a mile away. The combinations that Bivol was throwing against the ropes, the shot selection, it was a thing of beauty. I loved how he was finishing the combinations with that good stiff jab right to Canelo's face, because usually Canelo, he's become a very good counterpuncher later in his career, so he can kind of intercept your combination and get off his own combination and then end up winning the exchange. And Bivol did an excellent job of getting his combination off that he wanted to get off and then finishing with that stiff jab and creating a little bit of that distance and stepping back. Even the times Canelo was enticing him, hey, come back in, engage. Bivol was like, nope, I won that exchange. On to the next one. It was a very disciplined performance, and you said it best. A star was born last night.
Yeah, I was blown away. Canelo Alvarez has and always will be one of the best offensive strikers in boxing. He's really great at putting combos together and really putting the power in and disguising it with a lot of, touch shots. He'll touch you and then crack you and make it count. But as of late, he's become quite the defensive fighter. He's able to slip and move. I know if you're on Instagram just like I am, every now and again, maybe once a week, you get some sort of highlight reel of Canelo just moving and making somebody miss and looking like $1 million. Well, last night he was trying to do that, and he was successful a couple of times, but man, Bivol was able to get some of those combinations off, and then they'd slow him down, and you can't really tell when they're in the fire and the fight's happening in live time. But when you started shooting the slow-mo replays in between the rounds, and you're watching these 8-punch combinations that Bivol's throwing, and Canelo's actively trying to defend, and he's landing 4, 5, 6 out of 8 punches, you're like, oh my God, this guy is putting it on Canelo. And I'm sitting there going, Canelo is such a good boxer. but I don't think he won that round. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what the striking numbers are. I know the judges don't get to see that, so I kind of feel like I'm in a judge's standpoint, but I don't think that round went to Canelo. I'm sitting there scratching my head going, this is a 5-1 underdog, and unless I'm horrible at judging fights or I'm seeing something off, Bivol is running away with this fight. And by the time the 6th round started, we're halfway through the fight, and I had 1 round scored for Canelo at that point. And I was just like, man, unless I'm watching this completely off, I think Bivol's kind of running away with this thing. And by that point, it took a lot of composure out of Canelo to stay in the game mentally. I know he was ready to check out after about 8 or 9 rounds. He was able to try to, seize his moment, because even though we weren't really sure, he knew he was down on the cards.
Yeah.
And so he started to bring the power towards the end and just see what he could do. But one thing that stuck out to me more than anything on Canelo's side of the performance was that his gas finally started to show. And we realized he doesn't have an endless gas tank. And I don't think it's because he stopped doing cardio. I don't think it's because he's not conditioned the way he used to be. I think every human has an optimal size and an optimal weight. And when you start to exceed that, even if you are a high-level athlete and it's all muscle, not fat, it begins to take a toll on your cardiovascular, on your oxygen, everything. And I think that he's reached the top. I don't think we need to see Canelo go any higher than 175. If anything, he needs to maybe circle back down to about 168, where his cardio seemed basically unstoppable. For me, he seemed a little flat-footed for the second half of the fight, and he was not near the defensive fighter that we've usually seen him become.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect assessment. And I think 168 is the upper limit of where Canelo needs to be competing. Bivol last night looked like a guy whose frame is appropriate for 175.
He cut down.
With the weight cut. Exactly. Canelo looked like he packed on a lot of muscle. And, when you talk about things like wrestling and grappling and jiu-jitsu, things of that nature, strength plays a big factor in it. But at the same time, in boxing, you can almost have a size disadvantage where when you get so big and so muscular, it's such a long fight, 12 3-minute rounds. That's 36 minutes of fighting. All of that muscle can come to haunt you, especially towards the later rounds, and especially when the person that you're fighting is landing things right in your face, zapping your energy with good body shots and stuff like that. All the credit in the world to Bivol, but I do think that Canelo was a little bit undersized, and I think he tried to make up for it by packing on too much muscle, and his frame just is not optimal right there. But I think that Bivol, more than anything, it was the shot selection, it was the cadence, and it was sticking to his game plan. Canelo is so good at defense because there's only so many punches you can throw in boxing. You have a jab, a cross, a hook, an uppercut, and an overhand, and that's pretty much it. And then with variations thereof. But Bivol last night was throwing things with timing and cadence and surprising me with combinations that I am not used to seeing, and I think that's what really disrupted Canelo last night. And Bivol did a really good job of timing his power, because not every shot in the combination would be powerful. It would be 2 or 3 out of the 6 that were real power shots, and those were the ones that tended to get through. Whereas towards the end of that fight, Canelo was looking for the finish, going for that knockout, throwing nothing but power shots, which were very easy for Bivol to see, ultimately losing the 115-113. And I think that's a generous scorecard, and I mean generous in the sense that I think it was worse than that. I think Canelo got a decent shake with 115-113. I had it more 117-111.
Yeah, I definitely thought Bivol started to run away with the fight. And, I gave Canelo, I guess, 3 rounds.
Yeah.
And every one of them was relatively competitive, right? He did hold his own in the rounds he was losing, but some of those barrages that Bivol was throwing was just way too much and clear-cut, decisive combinations that were winning him these rounds. And I was so impressed, just like you're saying, with the combination selection, because so many people get into a groove and you almost learn, like, let's just say from a world champion boxer all the way to the mom that wants to do cardio boxing for exercise. You learn your 1-2-3 combination, 1-2-3-2. Those types of things are all embedded in everybody that does boxing, from the greatest to the first day person that's ever done boxing. Bivol was kind of throwing some things, not unorthodox, but very interesting types of combinations and more punches than generally people like to throw against a guy like Canelo, who is good at block, and countering. I just think that Bivol was throwing way too much at him, and he was throwing punches and bunches at a very fast pace. That rapid pace just makes you unable to defend and unable to see where your counters can come in at. And I think he started to frustrate Canelo, and that's why Canelo started loading up, especially towards the end of the fight, and just try to knock him out with something because he knew he was down on the cards, knew he needed to get a big knockout, and it just wasn't there for him. And if I could say anything, because I did hear that he's trying to activate the rematch, the instant rematch in his contract. And I think Bivol would be a fool if he didn't take that, because I think he'd probably win. He looked like he could have gone another 5 or 6 rounds. He was hopping by the 10th, 11th, 12th round. He was still hopping around the ring. So while Canelo's flat-footed and you're still bouncing around, that shows that you had plenty left in you and you were not gassing whatsoever. If I were to be in Canelo's corner and in his ear leading up to this fight, I'd say, I know the weight limit's 175 for this rematch. Don't worry about going there. Get as close as you can to 168. Yep. Let's go in there, the smaller guy. Yeah, you might not knock him out, but you have the boxing skills to beat this guy at boxing. And you're going to have to go 12 rounds with him because he's big and he's hard to finish. You can't finish him, I don't think, unless you land the perfect shot, but let's not look for that perfect shot. Let's go piece him up and have a perfect fight. And that, to me, is the only way Canelo's going to win this rematch. I don't see him finishing Bivol, and I do see, if there is a finish in them fighting in the rematch, that it goes to Bivol.
Yeah, I definitely would tend to agree with that. And I think you're absolutely right. Look, just go in with the best frame that you can bring forward and bring your skills. You don't need to be the biggest guy at the top end of the weight limit. I mean, look at Deontay Wilder's career. Deontay Wilder's a very small heavyweight who has a knockout ratio that's just insane. He pretty much, besides the Tyson Fury trilogy, he knocks out everybody he fights. He did knock out the one decision he had, he went back and knocked that guy out, Stiverne. So you definitely don't need to be at the top end of a weight class, especially if your body frame doesn't fit that. And I think that's a good piece of advice. Not that Canelo needs it from us, but I think that it would be very smart of him to not try to get to that upper limit. Come in at your natural weight, come in feeling good, come in with the body that gives you the best chance cardiovascularly, maneuverability, maneuver-wise, and all of that. And I think if he does that, he'll have a better chance at winning. But man, Bivol's a good fighter, and that'll be the hardest person for him to beat maybe in his entire career.
Yeah, and if he goes 2-0 against Canelo, he looks like $1 million. He's able to speak multiple languages, sounds good on the microphone. A star was born last night, and I think he has true potential to keep growing and become a major star in the sport of boxing.
I totally agree. Guys, drop us a line. Let us know, was a star born last night in Dimitry Bivol, and should Canelo Alvarez immediately invoke that rematch clause, or is he biting off more than he can chew? We love chatting with you in the comments, and if you haven't already, a subscribe to the channel is much appreciated. Peace.